The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. Tonight was the annual Royal Charity Gala, one of the most important events on the royal calendar. Guests from around the world had gathered to support various charitable causes close to the royal family's heart. The evening promised to be magnificent, with members of the royal family expected to make their grand entrance shortly. Queen Camilla stood in her private dressing room, surrounded by her lady-in-waiting and personal stylist. The room buzzed with quiet activity as final preparations were made for the evening ahead. Her elegant navy blue gown hung perfectly, designed specifically for tonight's occasion by one of Britain's most celebrated fashion houses. The dress featured intricate beadwork that caught the light beautifully, creating an almost ethereal effect. Sarah, her trusted lady-in-waiting, carefully arranged the jewelry selection on the ornate dressing table. There were several magnificent pieces to choose from, each with its own history and significance. The royal jewelry collection was vast and impressive, containing pieces that had been worn by generations of royal women before her. Tonight's selection would need to complement her outfit while maintaining the dignity and elegance expected of Queen. As Camilla examined the jewelry options, her eyes fell upon a particularly striking sapphire and diamond necklace. The piece was absolutely breathtaking, featuring deep blue sapphires surrounded by brilliant white diamonds in an intricate setting. The craftsmanship was exceptional, clearly the work of master jewelers. The necklace seemed to call out to her, its beauty undeniable and perfect for her navy gown. "This one is perfect," Camilla said, pointing to the sapphire necklace. "The blue will complement my dress beautifully, and the diamonds will catch the light wonderfully in the ballroom." Sarah hesitated for just a moment, her hand hovering over the necklace. Something flickered across her face, but she quickly composed herself and reached for the piece. "Of course, Your Majesty. It's absolutely stunning and will look magnificent on you." The necklace felt surprisingly light as Sarah fastened it around Camilla's neck. The cool metal settled against her skin, and she could feel the weight of the precious stones. Looking in the mirror, she was pleased with how perfectly it complemented her entire ensemble. The deep blue of the sapphires brought out the color in her dress, while the diamonds added just the right amount of sparkle for such a formal occasion. "Perfect," Camilla murmured, admiring her reflection. "This will do beautifully for tonight." Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, King Charles was putting the finishing touches on his own appearance for the evening. His formal evening wear was impeccable, as always, pressed to perfection and fitted exactly to his frame. As the king, he understood the importance of presenting himself perfectly at such events, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized by the media and guests alike. His private secretary briefed him on the evening schedule as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Your Majesty, the receiving line begins at 7:30, followed by cocktails in the blue drawing room. Dinner will be served at 8:15 in the state dining room, and dancing will commence in the ballroom at 9:30. Charles nodded, mentally reviewing the guest list and the various dignitaries he would need to greet personally. These events required careful attention to protocol and diplomacy. Every conversation, every gesture would be noted and potentially reported. He had been attending such functions for decades, yet he never took the responsibility lightly. "And the Princess of Wales?" Charles inquired. "Will she be joining us this evening?" "I'm afraid not, Your Majesty. The princess sends her regrets. She has a prior engagement with one of her patronages that could not be rescheduled. She was quite disappointed to miss tonight's gala." Charles nodded understandingly. Catherine's dedication to her charitable work was admirable, and he respected her commitment to her various patronages. Still, her presence would have been welcomed at such an important event. The Princess of Wales had a natural grace at these gatherings that put guests at ease and helped ensure the evening's success. In the grand entrance hall, staff members were making final preparations for the arrival of the guests. Every surface gleamed under the soft lighting, and fresh flowers had been arranged throughout the space. The red carpet had been rolled out, creating an elegant pathway for the distinguished visitors who would soon arrive. The guest list for tonight's gala was impressive, featuring ambassadors, philanthropists, business leaders, and celebrities who supported various charitable causes. Each guest had been carefully selected not only for their generous contributions, but also for their commitment to making a positive difference in the world. The funds raised tonight would support numerous charities across the Commonwealth, touching the lives of countless individuals in need. As 7 o'clock approached, the first guests began arriving at the palace gates. Their vehicles formed an impressive procession as they made their way up the long drive toward the main entrance. Photographers lined the route, their cameras ready to capture images of the elegant arrivals. The excitement in the air was palpable as anticipation built for the evening ahead. Inside the palace, final preparations were being completed in the staterooms. The dining room table had been set with the finest china, crystal, and silver, creating a display of unparalleled elegance. Each place setting was positioned with mathematical precision, and the centerpieces of fresh flowers added color and fragrance to the magnificent space. The kitchen staff was putting the finishing touches on what promised to be an exceptional meal. The menu had been carefully planned to showcase the best of British cuisine while accommodating the diverse tastes of the international guests. Every dish had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring that the dining experience would be as memorable as the evening itself. As the clock approached 7:15, Queen Camilla made her final preparations to leave her private apartments. She took one last look in the mirror, ensuring that every detail of her appearance was perfect. The sapphire necklace caught the light beautifully, its deep blue stones creating a stunning focal point for her ensemble. "You look absolutely radiant, Your Majesty," Sarah commented as she handed Camilla her evening gloves. "The necklace is particularly striking tonight." Camilla smiled, pleased with how everything had come together. "Thank you, Sarah. I feel quite confident about this evening." The necklace was an excellent choice. King Charles was already waiting in the corridor outside their private apartments when Camilla emerged. He looked distinguished in his formal evening wear, every inch the king he had trained his entire life to become. As Camilla approached, he smiled appreciatively at her elegant appearance. "You look absolutely beautiful, my dear," he said, offering her his arm. "That dress is stunning, and the jewelry complements it perfectly." For just a moment, Charles's eyes lingered on the necklace at her throat. Something about it seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place where he might have seen it before. The sapphires were particularly striking, and the overall design was quite distinctive. He made a mental note to ask about it later, when they had a quiet moment together. "Shall we?" Camilla asked, accepting his offered arm with a warm smile. Together, they made their way toward the staterooms where their guests would be waiting. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly in the grand corridors as they walked, past portraits of previous monarchs, and through rooms filled with centuries of royal history. Tonight, they would add their own chapter to that ongoing story. The receiving line had already formed in the blue drawing room by the time they arrived. Guests stood in elegant clusters, their formal attire creating a sea of beautiful gowns and perfectly tailored evening wear. Conversations buzzed quietly throughout the room as people greeted old friends and made new acquaintances. As Charles and Camilla entered the room, a hush fell over the assembled guests. Everyone turned toward the royal couple, and there was a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. The evening's formal proceedings were about to begin. "Your Majesties," announced the Lord Chamberlain, "your guests await your pleasure." Charles stepped forward first, beginning the traditional process of greeting each guest individually. This was one of his favorite aspects of such events, the opportunity to meet personally with people who were making a real difference in the world. Each conversation, however brief, was an opportunity to learn about their work and express his appreciation for their efforts. Camilla followed beside him, engaging warmly with each guest they encountered. Her natural charm and genuine interest in people made her particularly effective at these gatherings. She had a gift for making each person feel valued and appreciated, remembering details from previous conversations and asking thoughtful questions about their work. As they moved through the receiving line, several guests commented admiringly on Camilla's necklace. The piece was certainly eye-catching, and the sapphires seemed to glow in the soft lighting of the drawing room. Each compliment pleased her, confirming that she had made an excellent choice for the evening. Lady Morrison, wife of a prominent philanthropist, was particularly enthusiastic about the jewelry. "Your Majesty, that necklace is absolutely exquisite. The sapphires are magnificent. I don't think I've ever seen stones quite that beautiful before." "Thank you so much," Camilla replied graciously. "I'm quite fond of it myself. The craftsmanship is truly exceptional." Lord Ambassador Williams also took notice of the piece during their brief conversation. "The royal jewelry collection never fails to amaze," he commented with genuine admiration. "That particular necklace is quite striking. The design is so elegant and timeless." Charles continued to greet guests, but found himself occasionally glancing at his wife's necklace. There was definitely something familiar about it, though the specific memory remained just out of reach. The nagging feeling that he should recognize it continued to grow stronger as the evening progressed. As they neared the end of the receiving line, Charles made a mental note to ask Camilla about the piece later. Perhaps she could tell him more about its history or where it had come from. The royal collection was so vast that even he didn't know every piece intimately, but this particular necklace seemed like something he should remember. The dinner bell chimed softly, indicating that it was time for guests to make their way to the state dining room. The formal dining portion of the evening was always one of the highlights of royal galas, offering an opportunity for more intimate conversations while enjoying exceptional cuisine in magnificent surroundings. Charles offered Camilla his arm once again as they prepared to lead their guests into dinner. The evening was proceeding beautifully, and the cause they were supporting tonight would certainly benefit from the generous donations being pledged. Still, that nagging feeling about the necklace continued to trouble him, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to surface. As they entered the dining room, the assembled guests rose respectfully. The magnificent table setting drew appreciative murmurs from those who had never dined in the state dining room before. Everything was perfect, the lighting, the flowers, the music playing softly in the background. It promised to be a truly memorable evening for all in attendance. Charles and Camilla took their places at the head table, and the formal dinner began. Throughout the meal, Charles found himself engaged in fascinating conversations with guests about their charitable work and philanthropic efforts. Yet even as he focused on these important discussions, his eyes occasionally drifted to that familiar-looking necklace, the mystery of its identity continuing to nag at the back of his mind. The state dining room buzzed with elegant conversation as the first course was served. Crystal glasses caught the light from the ornate chandeliers overhead, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the pristine white tablecloth. Charles engaged warmly with the ambassador to his right, discussing a new education initiative in developing nations, while Camilla charmed the renowned philanthropist seated to her left with questions about her latest hospital project. Despite the engaging conversations flowing around him, Charles found his attention repeatedly drawn to the necklace adorning his wife's throat. Each time the sapphires caught the light, something stirred in his memory. The feeling was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, like trying to remember a name that danced just beyond his grasp. He had seen that particular arrangement of stones before, but where and when remained frustratingly elusive. "Your Majesty," said Mrs. Patterson, the wife of a prominent businessman, leaning slightly toward Camilla from across the table. "I simply must compliment you on that extraordinary necklace. The sapphires are absolutely divine. Is it a recent addition to the collection?" Camilla touched the necklace gently, her fingers tracing the outline of the largest central sapphire. "Thank you so much for your kind words. I'm quite taken with it myself. The piece has such elegant lines, don't you think?" Charles listened to this exchange with growing unease. Something about Camilla's response seemed oddly evasive. She hadn't actually answered the question about whether it was a recent addition, and her usual detailed knowledge about the provenance of royal jewelry seemed notably absent. This was unlike her. Camilla typically enjoyed sharing the fascinating histories behind the pieces she wore. The second course arrived with considerable fanfare, featuring locally sourced ingredients prepared by the palace's award-winning culinary team. The conversation at the head table shifted to discussions of sustainable farming practices and supporting local producers. Charles participated enthusiastically in these discussions, as environmental causes had always been close to his heart, yet part of his mind remained occupied with the mystery of the necklace. During a brief lull in conversation, Charles leaned closer to his wife. "That's a particularly striking piece you've chosen tonight, darling. I don't recall seeing it recently. Where did it come from?" Camilla's fork paused halfway to her mouth for just a fraction of a second before she continued with her meal. "Oh, you know how vast the collection is, Charles. There's so many beautiful pieces that we don't often have occasions to wear them all. I thought tonight called for something special." Again, Charles noted that she hadn't directly answered his question. This was definitely unusual behavior for Camilla, who was typically quite forthcoming about such matters. His unease began to deepen, though he couldn't quite articulate why her responses were troubling him so much. Lady Ashworth, seated further down the table, had been admiring the necklace throughout dinner. She was known for her extensive knowledge of jewelry and had written several books on the subject of royal gems. During the brief pause between the second and third courses, she approached the head table. "Your Majesty," she said to Camilla, "I hope you don't mind my saying, but that necklace is absolutely extraordinary. The cut of those sapphires is particularly fine. They appear to be Ceylon stones, if I'm not mistaken. The setting is quite distinctive as well. Might I ask about the piece's history?" Charles watched his wife's reaction carefully. Camilla's smile seemed to tighten almost imperceptibly, and she touched her throat in what appeared to be a slightly protective gesture. "You're very kind to notice, Lady Ashworth. The royal collection contains so many magnificent pieces, each with their own stories. I'm afraid I don't have all the details at my fingertips this evening." Lady Ashworth nodded politely, though Charles noticed a puzzled expression cross her face. As someone deeply knowledgeable about royal jewelry, she would certainly be aware that the Queen typically knew considerable detail about the pieces she chose to wear. Her puzzlement only added to Charles's growing sense that something was amiss. The third course was served with its accompanying wine, and conversation resumed its natural flow. Charles found himself studying his wife more carefully now, noting small details he might otherwise have missed. There was a subtle tension in her posture that hadn't been there earlier in the evening. She was engaging charmingly with the guests, as always, but something seemed different. Ambassador Rodriguez, seated several places down from the royal couple, had been observing the necklace throughout the evening. He had attended many royal functions over the years and prided himself on his knowledge of royal protocol and jewelry. Something about tonight's piece was nagging at him as well, though like Charles, he couldn't quite place what it was. During the serving of the fourth course, Ambassador Rodriguez finally made his way over to the head table during a natural break in the conversation. "Your Majesties," he said with a respectful bow, "what a magnificent evening this has been. Queen Camilla, if I may say so, that necklace is particularly stunning tonight. The sapphires are quite remarkable." "Thank you, Ambassador Rodriguez," Camilla replied graciously. "How kind of you to notice." "If I may ask," the ambassador continued, "the piece seems somewhat familiar. Has it been worn recently at other state functions? I have such admiration for the historical significance of the royal jewelry collection." Charles watched this exchange with intense interest. The ambassador's question was perfectly reasonable, yet he could see that Camilla appeared uncomfortable with the line of inquiry. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes showed a flicker of something that might have been anxiety. "I'm sure many pieces might seem familiar," Camilla responded diplomatically. "The collection has been worn by royal ladies for generations. Perhaps you're thinking of a similar piece." Ambassador Rodriguez nodded politely, though Charles could see that the man wasn't entirely satisfied with the response. Like Lady Ashworth before him, the ambassador seemed puzzled by the vague nature of the Queen's replies about a piece she was prominently displaying. As the evening progressed into the dessert course, Charles found his memory working overtime trying to place the necklace. The distinctive arrangement of the sapphires, the particular style of the diamond setting, the overall proportions of the piece. Everything about it seemed familiar, yet the specific context remained maddeningly out of reach. The royal photographer made his rounds during dessert, capturing images for the official record of the evening. As he approached the head table, he paused to take several shots of the royal couple. Charles noticed that each time the flash went off, the sapphires in Camilla's necklace seemed to blaze with an almost electric blue fire. "Magnificent piece, Your Majesty," the photographer commented to Camilla as he adjusted his equipment. "Those sapphires are absolutely brilliant. They're going to look spectacular in the official photos." "Thank you," Camilla replied, though Charles noticed she seemed less pleased by the attention the necklace was drawing than he would have expected. Usually, she enjoyed discussing the historical pieces and their significance. As coffee and petit fours were served, the formal dining portion of the evening began to wind down. Soon, guests would adjourn to the ballroom for dancing and continued socializing. Charles knew that in the ballroom, under the bright chandeliers, and with more people circulating, the necklace would draw even more attention and comments. Lord Burlington, an elderly gentleman who had known the royal family for decades, made his way to the head table as guests began to rise from their seats. He had been observing Camilla's necklace throughout the evening with a particularly thoughtful expression. "Your Majesty," he said to Camilla, bowing slightly, "forgive an old man's curiosity, but that necklace has been fascinating me all evening. The design is so distinctive, and I could swear I've seen it before. Might it be one of the pieces from Queen Mary's collection? Or perhaps something more recent?" Charles felt his pulse quicken. Lord Burlington was known for his encyclopedic knowledge of royal history and jewelry. If he was expressing specific curiosity about the piece, there was probably good reason for it. Camilla's response came perhaps a beat too quickly. "Oh, Lord Burlington, you know how these things are. So many beautiful pieces, so many occasions to wear them. I'm afraid I chose this one simply because it complemented my dress so beautifully." Charles noticed that once again, his wife had managed to avoid giving a direct answer about the necklace's identity or provenance. This pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, and his unease was rapidly transforming into genuine concern. As they prepared to move to the ballroom, Charles made a decision. He needed to understand what was happening with this necklace, and he needed to understand it tonight. The nagging feeling of familiarity was becoming stronger with each passing hour, and something about Camilla's evasive responses was deeply troubling him. "Darling," he said quietly to Camilla as they rose from the table, "might I have a private word before we join the guests in the ballroom?" Camilla's eyes flickered with what Charles was now certain was anxiety. "Of course, dear, though perhaps we shouldn't keep our guests waiting too long." "Just a brief moment," Charles assured her, though his tone carried a firmness that indicated this was not merely a request. They made their excuses to the nearby guests and stepped into a small antechamber adjacent to the dining room. Charles closed the door behind them, ensuring their privacy for what he sensed might be a difficult conversation. "Camilla," he began gently but seriously, "I need to ask you directly about that necklace. I know I've seen it before, and your responses this evening about its history have been unusual. You typically know every detail about the pieces you choose to wear." Camilla's hand went instinctively to her throat, her fingers closing protectively around the sapphires. For a moment, she looked as though she might continue with the vague responses she had been giving all evening. Then, something in Charles's expression seemed to convince her that evasion was no longer an option. "Charles," she said quietly, "I can explain. It's not what you might think." "Then please," he said, his voice carrying both patience and an unmistakable note of authority, "help me understand exactly what it is." The music from a ballroom could be heard faintly through the walls, reminding them both that their guests were waiting. Yet Charles knew that whatever revelation was coming about the necklace, it was important enough to risk keeping the distinguished gathering waiting a few minutes longer in the quiet of the small antechamber, away from the bustling energy of their waiting guests. Camilla took a deep breath. Her fingers still rested protectively over the sapphire necklace, and Charles could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. The soft lighting in the room cast gentle shadows, but it couldn't hide the tension that had suddenly filled the space between them. "Charles," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know that I didn't mean any harm. I truly didn't think anyone would notice or remember." The gravity in her tone sent a chill through Charles. Whatever she was about to tell him, it was clearly more serious than a simple mix-up in jewelry selection. He waited patiently, giving her the time she needed to find the right words. "This necklace," she continued, touching the central sapphire gently, "it belonged to Catherine. It was a wedding gift to her from her family, specifically chosen to complement her engagement ring. She wore it on several occasions early in her marriage, before her style preferences evolved toward more contemporary pieces." Charles felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. The familiar feeling that had been nagging at him all evening suddenly crystallized into sharp, clear memory. He could picture Catherine wearing the necklace at a state dinner several years ago, the sapphires bringing out the blue in her eyes as she had gracefully moved through the receiving line. The image was so vivid now that he wondered how he could have failed to recognize it immediately. "Camilla," he said slowly, trying to process the implications of what she had just told him. "How did you come to have Catherine's necklace? And why would you choose to wear it tonight, knowing its significance?" Camilla moved to one of the chairs in the small room and sat down carefully, mindful of her elaborate gown. Charles remained standing, his formal posture reflecting both his royal bearing and the seriousness of the situation they now faced. "It's more complicated than you might think," she said, looking down at her hands. "Several months ago, Catherine's secretary contacted mine about updating her jewelry insurance. They needed to catalog all pieces and their current locations. During that process, it came to light that several items had been stored in various vaults and hadn't been worn for quite some time." Charles listened carefully, beginning to understand, but hoping he was wrong about where this story was leading. The insurance company recommended that pieces not being actively worn should be either returned to the central collection or formally transferred, if they were personal gifts rather than crown property. Catherine's secretary indicated that she had moved away from wearing statement sapphire pieces and suggested that perhaps they could be redistributed to other family members who might appreciate them. "And you interpreted that as permission to simply take the necklace?" Charles asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Not exactly," Camilla said quickly. "There was correspondence between our offices. My secretary was told that Catherine was happy for other family members to enjoy pieces she wasn't currently wearing. But I realize now that there may have been some miscommunication about the specific approval process." Charles ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he rarely allowed himself in formal settings. "Camilla, you're telling me that you took Catherine's personal jewelry based on what might have been a miscommunication between secretaries. When my secretary showed me the necklace, she assured me that it had been cleared for my use. I didn't question it because it seemed like such a generous gesture from Catherine. You know how thoughtful she always is about family relationships." The situation was becoming clearer, and it was worse than Charles had initially feared. Not only had there been a serious breach of protocol regarding personal property, but it had happened in the most public possible setting. Every guest at tonight's gala had seen the necklace. Many had commented on it, and tomorrow the photographs would be in newspapers around the world. "Did you not think to confirm this directly with Catherine?" Charles asked. "This is exactly the kind of matter that should have been handled personally between the two of you." Camilla looked up at him with genuine regret in her eyes. "I realize that now. I was so focused on tonight's preparations, and when my secretary assured me everything had been properly arranged, I trusted her judgment. But you're absolutely right. I should have spoken to Catherine myself." Charles began pacing the small space, his mind racing through the potential consequences of this situation. Catherine's absence tonight suddenly took on new significance. Had she known about the necklace? Had she stayed away deliberately to avoid a confrontation? Or would she be as surprised as he was when she saw the photos from tonight's event? "The worst part," Charles said, pausing in his pacing to look directly at his wife, is that Catherine isn't here tonight to address this directly. She's attending to her charitable obligations, completely unaware that her personal jewelry is being displayed at a royal gala. I know, Camilla whispered. I've been feeling increasingly uncomfortable about it all evening, especially with all the attention the necklace has drawn. I kept hoping no one would recognize it specifically, but of course that was foolish thinking. Charles felt a mixture of disappointment and protective concern. His relationship with Catherine had always been warm and respectful, built on mutual regard for their shared commitment to royal duties. She had never shown anything but courtesy and kindness toward Camilla, despite the complicated history that had preceded her marriage to William. Charles, Camilla said, standing and approaching him carefully, I want to make this right. I'll remove the necklace immediately and ensure it's returned to Catherine first thing tomorrow morning. I'll personally apologize for the misunderstanding and take full responsibility for not confirming the arrangement directly with her. It's too late for that tonight, Charles replied, though his tone had softened slightly. Removing it now would only draw more attention and create speculation. But you're right that Catherine deserves a personal apology and immediate return of the piece. From the ballroom, they could hear the orchestra beginning the first dance of the evening. Their guests would be expecting them to make their appearance soon, and protocol demanded that they not keep distinguished visitors waiting much longer. Yet Charles felt the weight of this situation pressing heavily on his shoulders. There's something else you need to understand, he said seriously. This isn't just about the necklace itself. Catherine's jewelry represents her personal style, her family history, and her individual identity within the royal family. When you wear her pieces, especially without her explicit knowledge and consent, it sends a message about boundaries and respect that could have far-reaching implications. Camilla nodded, clearly beginning to grasp the full scope of her error. I truly didn't see it that way when I chose it tonight. I was only thinking about how beautiful it was and how well it complemented my gown. I didn't consider the deeper significance. The press will certainly see it differently, Charles continued. They've always been eager to find evidence of tension between you and Catherine. When photos of tonight circulate showing you wearing her distinctive necklace, especially when she's notably absent from the event, it will fuel speculation and potentially damage relationships we've all worked hard to build. The reality of the media implications was clearly hitting Camilla now. Her face had grown pale, and Charles could see that she was beginning to understand the potential consequences of what had seemed like a simple jewelry choice. What do we do now? She asked quietly. Charles considered their options carefully. The immediate priority was getting through the rest of the evening without creating additional complications. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they needed to maintain their composure and fulfill their obligations to their guests. For now, we return to our guests and complete this evening as planned, he decided. We owe that to everyone who has come here tonight to support these important causes. Tomorrow, we'll address the situation properly with Catherine. And if anyone else asks about the necklace tonight, Camilla asked. Be gracious, but don't elaborate, Charles advised. The fewer details we provide at this point, the better. We need time to resolve this properly before it becomes public knowledge. As they prepared to return to their guests, Charles felt the weight of leadership settling heavily on his shoulders. This situation would require careful handling to prevent damage to family relationships and public perception. He thought of Catherine, probably at this moment engaged in her own charitable work, completely unaware of the controversy brewing around her personal jewelry. Camilla, he said as they reached the door, I want you to understand that my concern here isn't about blame or punishment. It's about maintaining the trust and respect that holds this family together. Catherine has always shown us nothing but loyalty and support, and she deserves the same in return. Understand completely, Camilla replied. And I promise you, I'll make this right with her, whatever it takes. As they opened the door to return to their guests, the sound of music and conversation flooded over them. The ballroom was filled with elegantly dressed guests enjoying the finest hospitality that Buckingham Palace could provide. None of them were aware of the drama that had just unfolded in the small antechamber, and Charles intended to keep it that way until they could address the situation properly. But as they walked toward the ballroom, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that this evening had marked a turning point. The sapphire necklace that had seemed so beautiful earlier in the evening now felt like a weight around not just Camilla's neck, but around the entire family's reputation. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and the need for careful damage control. For now, though, duty called. They had guests to attend to, causes to support, and the appearance of royal unity to maintain. Charles straightened his shoulders, offered Camilla his arm once more, and prepared to face the ballroom full of distinguished guests who had no idea that the evening's most beautiful accessory had become its most complicated problem. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace was a sight to behold as Charles and Camilla made their entrance. Crystal chandeliers cast their warm glow over hundreds of guests who had gathered in elegant clusters throughout the magnificent space. The orchestra played softly in one corner while couples had already begun to take advantage of the dance floor. Despite the grandeur surrounding them, Charles felt the weight of the conversation he had just had with Camilla pressing heavily on his mind. As they moved through the ballroom, accepting congratulations on the evening's success and engaging in the expected social pleasantries, Charles found himself watching his wife carefully. She was performing her role flawlessly, as always, but he could see the subtle signs of tension that only someone who knew her well would notice. The way she touched the necklace periodically, the slightly forced quality of her smile, the careful way she steered conversations away from personal topics. Lady Morrison approached them near the center of the ballroom, her earlier enthusiasm for the necklace clearly undiminished. "Your Majesty," she said to Camilla, "I simply must tell you again how absolutely stunning that necklace is. I've been watching how beautifully it catches the light as you move. It's truly spectacular." "You're very kind," Camilla replied graciously, though Charles noticed her hand unconsciously move to cover the piece. "Thank you so much for your generous words. I was just telling my husband," Lady Morrison continued enthusiastically, "that I'm certain I've seen it photographed before. Perhaps in one of those lovely magazine features about the royal jewelry collection. It has such a distinctive design that it really stays with you." Charles felt his stomach tighten. If Lady Morrison was remembering seeing the necklace in photographs, it was quite possible she had seen images of Catherine wearing it. The distinctive arrangement of sapphires and diamonds was indeed memorable, exactly the kind of piece that would stick in someone's mind. "The royal collection is quite extensive," Charles interjected diplomatically. "Many pieces do appear in various publications over the years." Lady Morrison nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes, of course. I just find the history behind these pieces so fascinating. Each one tells such a story, doesn't it?" As Lady Morrison moved on to greet other guests, Charles caught Camilla's eye. He could see his own concern reflected in her expression. If other guests were beginning to place where they had seen the necklace before, the situation could become very complicated very quickly. Ambassador Williams approached next, accompanied by his wife, who was known for her extensive knowledge of royal protocol and history. Charles braced himself for what might be coming. "Your Majesties," Ambassador Williams said with a formal bow, "what a magnificent evening. The cause you're supporting tonight is so worthy, and the response has been tremendous." "Thank you, Ambassador," Charles replied warmly. "The generosity of our guests tonight has been truly overwhelming." Mrs. Williams stepped forward slightly, her eyes drawn immediately to Camilla's necklace. "Queen Camilla, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but that necklace is absolutely exquisite. The sapphires are particularly fine. If I may ask, is it a recent addition to your personal collection?" Charles felt every muscle in his body tense. Mrs. Williams was known for asking very direct questions, and her knowledge of royal jewelry was extensive. She would certainly remember if she had seen the piece worn by someone else. "Thank you for noticing," Camilla replied carefully. "It's a beautiful piece that seemed perfect for tonight's occasion." Mrs. Williams studied the necklace more closely, and Charles could practically see the wheels turning in her mind. "You know," she said slowly, There's something very familiar about it. The way the central sapphire is cut, the setting of the surrounding diamonds. I'm quite sure I've seen it before. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Pemberton, who had been eager to discuss the evening's fundraising results with Charles. As they moved into that discussion, Charles noticed that Mrs. Williams continued to observe Camilla's necklace with a thoughtful expression. Throughout the next hour, as they circulated through the ballroom, Charles became increasingly aware of the attention the necklace was drawing. Guests who might not normally pay particular attention to jewelry were clearly taken with the piece. The sapphires seemed to have their own magnetic quality, drawing eyes and comments wherever Camilla went. Lord Burlington approached them again near the refreshment table, his earlier curiosity about the necklace apparently unsatisfied. "Your Majesty," he said to Camilla, "I hope you'll forgive an old man's persistence, but that necklace has been troubling me all evening. I'm quite certain I've seen it before, and recently too. Might it have been worn at a previous state function?" Charles saw Camilla's composure falter slightly before she recovered. As I mentioned earlier, Lord Burlington, there are so many occasions and so many beautiful pieces. It's quite possible you've seen something similar. Lord Burlington nodded politely, but Charles could see that the elderly gentleman was not convinced by this explanation. His expression suggested that he was still trying to place exactly where and when he had seen the necklace, and his persistence was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The evening's photography session had concluded, but Charles knew that images from tonight would be circulating in the media within hours. The thought of Catherine seeing photos of Camilla wearing her personal necklace in tomorrow's newspapers filled him with dread. She would be hurt and confused, and rightfully so. As the evening progressed, Charles found himself in conversation with Duke Harrison, an old family friend who had known both his sons since childhood. The Duke had always been particularly fond of Catherine and had watched her grow into her role with great admiration. "Charles," the Duke said quietly, drawing him aside slightly, "I hope you don't mind my mentioning this, but I couldn't help noticing Camilla's necklace tonight. It's quite striking, and I could swear I've seen Catherine wear something very similar. In fact, I'm almost certain it's the same piece." Charles felt his heart sink. If Duke Harrison, who knew the family well, was making this connection, others certainly would too. The Duke was also known for his discretion, which meant he was raising this concern privately rather than making it a matter of public speculation. "The jewelry collection can sometimes create confusion," Charles replied carefully, though he could see that the Duke was not convinced by this explanation. "Perhaps," the Duke replied diplomatically. "I just thought I should mention it, in case there had been some sort of administrative oversight. These things do happen, and it's always better to address them quietly when possible." Charles appreciated the Duke's tactful approach, but it also confirmed his worst fears about how this situation might unfold. People who knew the family well were already noticing and beginning to ask questions. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection publicly. The dancing portion of the evening was in full swing now, and Charles led Camilla onto the floor for their traditional first dance. As they moved together to the orchestra's elegant waltz, he was acutely aware of the many photographers capturing their every move. The necklace would be prominently featured in every image, its distinctive sapphires catching the ballroom's lights dramatically. "Charles," Camilla said quietly as they danced, "I can see that more people are beginning to recognize the necklace. I'm increasingly worried about what tomorrow will bring." "As am I," he replied honestly. "But for now, we must simply get through this evening with dignity intact." As the dance concluded, they were approached by several more guests who offered compliments on the evening and, inevitably, on Camilla's jewelry. Each comment felt like another nail in the coffin of what Charles had hoped might remain a private family matter. The evening was beginning to wind down when one of the most concerning moments occurred. Lady Ashworth, the jewelry expert who had commented earlier, approached them with her husband. She had clearly spent the evening thinking about the necklace and had apparently reached some conclusions. "Your Majesty," she said to Camilla, "I hope you'll forgive my persistence about your necklace, but I believe I've finally placed where I've seen it before." Wasn't it the sapphire set that the Princess of Wales wore to the state dinner for the French president 2 years ago? I wrote about it in my column. Such an elegant choice for such a significant occasion. The directness of her statement left little room for evasion. Charles watched as Camilla struggled to find an appropriate response that wouldn't be an outright lie, but also wouldn't confirm Lady Ashworth's suspicions. Lady Ashworth, Charles interjected diplomatically. You know how these family jewelry arrangements can be. Pieces are often shared for different occasions when they complement particular outfits beautifully. Lady Ashworth nodded, but Charles could see in her expression that she understood exactly what had happened. As someone who wrote professionally about royal jewelry, she would certainly know the difference between pieces that belonged to the crown collection and those that were personal property of individual family members. As the evening finally began to conclude and guests started taking their leave, Charles felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had managed to get through the gala without any public confrontations or embarrassing scenes, but he knew that the real challenges would begin tomorrow when the photos were published and people had time to think about what they had observed. The final guest departed around midnight, and Charles and Camilla finally found themselves alone in the ballroom as the staff began the process of clearing away the evening's festivities. The room that had been so alive with music and conversation just hours before now felt hollow and somehow ominous. We need to contact Catherine first thing in the morning, Charles said as they walked slowly through the emptying ballroom. She needs to hear about this from us before she sees it anywhere else. I know, Camilla replied quietly. I've been thinking about what to say to her, how to explain what happened without sounding like I'm making excuses. The truth is usually the best approach, Charles advised. Acknowledge the mistake, apologize sincerely, and make it clear that you're returning the necklace immediately. As they made their way back to their private apartments, Charles couldn't help but reflect on how quickly an evening that had begun with such promise had become complicated by what should have been a simple jewelry choice. The causes they had supported tonight were important, and the fundraising had been successful, but he feared that would all be overshadowed by tomorrow's inevitable speculation about family dynamics and protocol breaches. Charles, Camilla said as they reached their apartments, I want you to know how deeply sorry I am about this entire situation. I never intended for any of this to happen, and I certainly never wanted to put you in such an awkward position. I know that, he replied gently, but intentions don't always protect us from consequences. We'll work through this together, but it's going to require careful handling and complete honesty with Catherine. As he prepared for bed, Charles found himself thinking about his daughter-in-law and the conversation they would need to have tomorrow. Catherine had always conducted herself with grace and dignity, even in difficult circumstances. She deserved the same courtesy and respect in return, and he was determined to ensure that this situation was resolved with the proper acknowledgement of the mistake that had been made. The sapphire necklace that had seemed so beautiful at the beginning of the evening now represented something much more complex. A reminder of the importance of clear communication, proper protocol, and the respect that family members owed to one another. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, but Charles was committed to ensuring that those conversations happened with honesty, humility, and a genuine desire to make things right.